It's the Central Weekly, a weekly podcast from the Central Podcast Network. Ladies and gentlemen, Trevor Ile is in the host seat this week. Trevor, glad to see you.
What's up, everybody?
You are one of our most dedicated guests. Don't tell James, one of my favorites.
Thank you.
I say that to everybody, though. And I also say, hey, we're going to have you back on the podcast. And I've never had anybody back on the podcast except for our host. So here's the deal. You were tapped to wrap up A Church Alive, our series on the book of Acts here at Central. Talking about what, my friend?
Faithfulness. Faithfulness as individuals, faithfulness as the church as a whole.
And basically, John, what he did was he went through the first maybe 7 chapters and then said, peace, I'm out of here. You got the rest, buddy.
Yeah, so like, I took it to chapter 12, kind of like 11 and 12.
So we got through half the book of Acts.
Yeah.
Maybe
kinda.
next year we'll do the back half of Acts.
Alive of the first half of Acts.
Because really, we didn't even get into Paul's missionary journeys. I mean, to an extent we did, but...
Kinda.
Paul, like, just an abbreviated version. So here's what we're going to do in this episode 79 of the Central Weekly. We're going to talk all about the faithfulness of the early church and how, like you said, we as individuals and we as a church can just really display faithfulness to God. You got a great lesson. But then, wait, there's more. Our guest for the Central Weekly, episode 79, is Mr. Joe Fatheree. Now, it's going to be really hard for me not to call him Mr. Fatheree because he was my teacher, history teacher, over in Effingham High School.
I don't think I knew
Heights.
that.
Yeah, he did. You didn't know that?
No, I knew he was in Effingham. I just didn't realize he was your teacher.
Yeah, he was my teacher. I had a bunch of, we get into this, but really he's got a really good perspective because not only is he on that retirement end of his teaching career, so there's so much wealth of knowledge there. He is just a guy that is a Renaissance man because he started coming to Central. He's got involved with groups, which we're going to talk about a group that he helped develop with James and kind of this curriculum and why that matters. And really just, again, lessons that he learned being a leader in a church, being a leader in the education system. And I mean, this guy also has got his hands on like future technology for students and really all of us abroad that my eyes just started to glaze over because there was just so much information he was throwing at us. And he really is a person we need to have back. So that's going to be our coming up after this. We won't feel bad if you fast forward.
There's more.
But wait, there's more. So let's chat about the sermon that we had. Now, A Church Alive is worth the drive. And you kind of started things off with a drive that you've had on your bucket list.
The road to Hana, which I've never been to Hawaii.
No, I never have either.
But I would like to be in Hawaii.
I've heard that it's Mexico, but like way better and way more expensive.
I've looked up the flight. I've been to Mexico. I've never been to Hawaii, if that puts it in perspective.
Yeah. But it was funny because so the road to Hana, is it with an A? No?
H-A-N-A.
Okay, so Hana. Okay. So and it reminds me because on my bucket list is I think it's Highway 101 on the California coast.
Pacific Coast Highway,
yes.
Highway 1.
That's on my yes, that is on my bucket list.
Mine as well. Even though I was on it when I was like 9, but
oh really?
Didn't appreciate it. In the convertible going up and down Highway 1.
Wow.
Would like to do it again.
So other things on your bucket list, Trevor Ile.
Skydiving used to be on it.
Not anymore?
I have kids now.
Yeah, that's a danger now.
Yeah.
You would leave Phoebe alone.
You never know. Yeah. You never know what could happen.
Yeah. But if somebody presented an opportunity and said, hey, we're going fly driving. We're going what am I saying? Skydiving. And I'm going to pay for it. We're going to go next month. I'll get all the training. It's all absolutely free. Would you do it or not? Would Phoebe let you do it? Probably. Would Phoebe let you do it?
Yeah, but she'd be nervous.
Yeah, I think Maria would let me if it was all paid.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not stretching here. If there's anybody listening, we're not trying to get people to...
Mr. England, are you out there?
Hello. He'd throw us out of a plane, but I don't think he'd give us the training. And other things. You got anything else? I've always had on my bucket list, it's funny that you were in this conversation and I'm asking this, but more ballparks, Major League ballparks.
Gotta go to all of them.
We've talked about this. I really want to go to San Francisco. Yep. Even just the new Safeco. Is it Safeco now still? No.
No, it is T-Mobile Park.
Yeah, it's always top. I'm always on YouTube watching people's rankings of ballparks.
Yeah, ballparks. I'd like to get over to Europe, like Spain.
Yes.
And Greece.
Yep.
And
I want
parts
to
of
do
Italy and
Yep.
stuff like that.
We said Italy at the same time.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, a lot of travel. It would be on my bucket list.
For sure.
Not too many. I think all of my experiences would be bound to where I would travel
sure.
to. But it was really funny because when we were going through this and the road to Hana, that sounds like a movie too.
It does feel odd to keep saying the road to Hana.
It sounds like really epic. But we have both of our guys sitting in our run-throughs on Thursday said they have both been there.
John and Sarah attempted it, which the first time I ever heard about it, I was at a conference, and this guy was like saying, "How many of you have done the road to Hana?" And I was like, "I don't even know what that is."
Yeah, I don't.
And a lot of hands went up, and then he said, "How many of you actually completed it? Actually stayed on it and didn't turn around and go back?" And much of the hands went down.
Yeah,
because they didn't complete it.
Yeah,
I mean, it is super windy, super curvy. I would probably throw up. Truthfully, I don't do super well in turning left and right repeatedly.
And how many one-way bridges?
59 one-way,
like
one-lane bridges.
One-lane bridges.
And
so basically, you're probably waiting a lot.
You're waiting, stop and go, 620 curves,
Wow.
all over like 55 to 65 miles.
Wow. So that's what slows it down.
Yeah.
Because it's what? I think they said 3.5 hours.
I mean, if you were to drive it and to never stop, I think it's like 3.5 hours, but they anticipate you are going to stop.
So it's a whole like 12
I mean,
hour day.
nobody wants to just drive 3 hours winding curves and not look at anything.
Yeah, that's true. And as the driver, I wouldn't be. Maria would have me like eyes forward.
Well, and it's like there's a drop off, there's a cliff, there's a waterfall.
Yeah,
Man.
That would be crazy. I like scenic drives. I'm just a big fan, and that's probably, you're right, the on the top of in the world, really.
Yeah, it's up there.
It's up there. So, and really, this is all tied to faithfulness.
Yeah, I mean, 620 curves, all that stuff we just described. Like, if you're going to set out to do it, there's a prize at the end.
Yeah.
There's a goal at the end, or you want to see something, and it's a lot like our faith. Like, I think sometimes we get on the journey and like, oh yeah, heaven's a part of it, but we don't think about it. It's like, why are we still doing this? Why are we still putting forth this effort and walking this journey? But it's like you could turn. I guess it happens a lot. People get off the road all the time. People turn around and abandon and move on and start something and don't finish it. So it has a lot of parallels to our faith.
Yeah, you had 2 big points, and we do not have our notes in front of us.
No, we don't.
Your first one was
that faithfulness binds stronger in or with a overarching tied to a big mission.
Yes. Because really, you're not, if you don't know what the outcome is going to be, it is completely, probably impossible to remain faithful.
What's the why? Why are we doing this?
Exactly. Yeah. And we really have that. And I'm glad, I mean, that's the thing too. It's, I would say heaven is talked about a lot in the Bible, but not in a lot of detail. Would you agree?
It's specific in idea,
yes,
but it's not specific in detail.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's on purpose.
Probably, it's probably better. I mean, the payoff is probably better that way.
Exactly. And I think, and then the verse that we can't even imagine. No eye has seen, no ear has heard, and but to me too, it is a little bit hard when I don't know exactly. But to remain faithful, and I think that's our call as Christians, is to remain faithful, but also remain. I don't know, fruitful is not the word I'm trying to say, but just keep that energy for other people as well. Because like you said, this whole series was very, what's the word you had? Building. Sequential, yes. Because we all started with, week 1 was all about the Holy Spirit and the birth of the church. And then now you're looking at the book of Acts where they're going out everywhere. Yeah. And you're looking at, and I love how you're talking about faithfulness of the individuals, and you look at the faithfulness of the individuals in Acts, but then you're also looking at the faith of the faithfulness of the church as a whole.
Right.
Because you've got these leaders in the church that are going everywhere. You're talking Paul, his missionary journeys, you're talking Peter, and you're talking Barnabas even.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about Barnabas for us.
Barnabas is a guy that's mentioned primarily in the missionary journees.
Yeah.
And he goes with Paul, and him and Paul get in a fight or whatever, whatever. He's on his own. He's with other people. But the example we use on him comes from chapter 11.
Yeah.
And it's where he shows up to Antioch, and they describe him as a good man, full of faith, full of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And many people were brought to Christ because of him.
Yeah.
And we're like, well, that's kind of the goal. Sum it up.
Yeah.
Tombstone.
Yep, that's the two. As I was saying, I was trying to give you guys some poetry on Thursday.
Some Edgar Allan Poe.
No, it was not Edgar Allan. It was Robert Frost. Thank you.
Ernest
Two roads
Hemingway?
diverged in a yellow wood, and I took the one less traveled, and
Walt
that's made all
Whitman?
the difference. No, you're just naming people. But here's the deal, though. Again, we're looking at these men, and I love how the Bible, every time it talks about a man that is doing great things in the early church, women too, but you're talking about a man that is filled with the Holy Spirit. I love how they always use those words to describe them. And I think it's by no accident that we can't remain faithful apart from the Holy Spirit.
Correct. Not possible.
Not possible. So your second point, I love that one too, but I can't think of it.
It is
Remember how I felt.
Faithfulness binds stronger with encouragement and accountability.
Encouragement and accountability. And I think that is one thing that we lack hardcore in our culture today. Encouragement and accountability. I think maybe you'll get some people that are encouraging, but then if that encouraging, that's great. You're puffed up, but you don't really stay puffed up because you're not being accountable. Why are those two things important for us?
So we use this parallel of the road, the highway. There's a lot there. It's both great and it's both difficult to navigate. Life is the same way. Our faith is the same way. So having somebody in it with you, you feel like you're pushed to keep going.
Yes.
It's harder to give up when somebody else is right there with you.
Yep.
We could have made parallels to working out, but
why wasn't that?
We didn't.
But true though, if you start a membership and you have somebody that meets you there, is keeping you accountable, that is going to be a lot better than if you didn't.
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah. That's why it should be important for gym owners. Well, they're just getting their money. I don't care. But gym owners to try to give discounts for buddies. Like if you bring in a buddy, well, they probably do that. They're smart people. But if you bring in a buddy and they stay with you and they come in with you and you key each other at the same time, then you get more, I don't know, a discount or something. Because there's probably again, we're talking about things we have no idea.
Right, yeah. Not a ton of experience. But to do things with others, it pushes you. Accountability, it just holds you to a higher level. It just pushes you to be more like Jesus, less like us.
And I think we both did we even brought James in to do another push for groups because, we could say so much about groups to make a big church feel small, to bring depth to your relationships. But just really keyed in on this one is groups keep people accountable. If you're intentional, and if you're intentional about it, because you would just become stagnant in your faith if you're not around other people. And God made us to be around other people. As much as we, Trevor, maybe a little bit more than me, want to be by themselves sometimes, there's a point that we are meant and we are made to be around other people.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's, one of the reasons why Central's growing right now and God's using us at such a time as this, like that.
For such a time as this.
Because people are yearning for genuine, intentional relationships. Because I don't think they're getting them. And coming out of COVID, it was almost like we were pulled apart. And now I think they're finding that, hopefully at Central and through groups too.
Yeah. It's good to see the renewed explosion of groups and the priority and the dedication that ministry is taking on.
Because we're recording this on Friday, and James said that he has about 190, which is an all-time high, which is crazy.
Yeah, and pushing for 200,
I think he'll get that. Because again,
it's just 11 over the weekend.
Exactly, and everybody waits the last minute. So if we're going into that number, going into it, that's the crazy thing. So. So Trevor, while we got you, the cool thing that I wanted you didn't really talk about in your lesson, but you've got a lot of men's events happening in the month of September, which we're recording on September 1st. And so
happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. But you're looking at a men's night. We're going to go backwards. A men's night on September 30th, a worship night.
And here at the church, Saturday night.
Your first worship night, really? Right?
Yeah.
And
tell me a little
bit about the Q&A panel. That's what interests me.
So we're gonna have time just to hang out, have some little bit of food, whatever. Eric and them are preparing worship stuff going on. Yeah. Then we're gonna seek, just to have we're not gonna be up there forever. It has the potential to be up there. It could go for a long time, but that's not the goal.
I've seen who's gonna be on your panel.
So I'm gonna ask questions to different aged men.
Yeah.
So like Chapel, Hayden Padinsky. Lucas Crawford, and Brian Fuller. Ryan, known from the Vine and various churches, and
Brian Fuller.
Brian from Woodlawn.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know he was from Woodlawn.
Well, no, I'm sorry. He's pastoring in Woodlawn.
Okay. See, you know more about this area than even I do. But really, I mean, and that's the reason I want you to. Okay, go back. So worship, Q&A panel.
Yep.
And that's 5 p.m. on Saturday.
The 30th.
The 30th.
I think we start the worship part at 6, but doors open at 5.
And then we go backwards from there. You've got the Central Missions open, which is not just for guys, but a lot of guys do that.
Correct.
And get a lot of
golf day at Green Hills to raise money for Rafa International, which is a sex trafficking and child trafficking organization that battles that. So
Yep. And then going a little bit closer is your first men's it's mostly men's. Your football watch party. First one.
September 10th, after church, after 11 o'clock church, we'll turn the TV on and have some food. And
how many guys did you get involved with men's fantasy football?
104. 104,
so up from last year. You had 100 even last year.
100 even last year.
Well, I'll tell you, I don't know if I told you this yet, and I'll tell this on the air. It was really neat because I sat down in my group, and you put a couple new guys in there that I didn't know, and one of them, his name was Rodney.
Yeah, he was one of the latest additions to getting in the league.
And so Rodney comes in. He doesn't have his computer. He has his phone, though. And you've said, bring your computer. It makes it easier.
Computer's easier.
For your fantasy draft. So he sits down next to me, and he's got his fantasy magazine. That's right, a piece of paper. And so I kind of like, what's this guy? But then if you realize this, those guys that still have those magazines, they're hardcore.
They are hardcore.
So I listened.
They've been at it for a while.
I listened to Rodney really carefully. Because when he opened his mouth and he would talk about a player, I would look for that player and maybe I would take that player.
Yeah.
So I have no guilt that he would bring up a couple, and I can't remember anybody's names, but he would bring up a couple like, oh yeah, they were really good last year. Click, I drafted him. And so, but
what if he was throwing you off?
What
if he was lying?
He could have, but they were high picks. So he could be a really smart guy. But he's a miner. He lives in Mulkeytown. He's in the Pinckneyville mine.
Yeah.
And here's what he said. He said, "Hey, what's your 8-year-old daughter's name?" I'm like, "This is weird. I have no idea who you are." And he goes, she's Everly. And he goes, "Well, that's awesome. My daughter's Macy, and she is really good friends with Everly in Kid Depot."
No kidding.
And they were really sad, or Macy was, when the announcement was made about, us moving to Carbondale. Again, we're not moving to Carbondale right away.
Right.
But we will be soon. But so Rodney was talking to Macy about this as a family, and they were like, you know what? We live in Mulkeytown. Why not? Why can't we go to Carbondale?
Yeah, sure.
Keep this relationship going that the kids are, I just, first of all, thought that was just really cool. Second of all, that's what the fantasy football is all about. Maria gave me a hard time when she said, "Oh, okay, have fun with your fake football."
Hey.
But I was like, there's a reason we do the fake football, because it builds relationships. And this was one example.
Yeah, there you go. And he was, looking to get connected.
Yeah.
He emailed me and said, "Hey, if there's any spot that comes open, or if you're looking for a guy, I'd love to jump in." So I think I was texting him Monday night. The draft was Tuesday.
Yeah.
So we're getting him in.
Yeah,
involved.
he said he's won leagues in the past. He's been doing it for 20 years.
Good for him.
So I think it's just really cool. And the reason I wanted you to just kind of, because you're here, and the whole reason you're doing a men's ministry to begin with is just to get these guys connected, to bring some accountability, to bring some encouragement, because I'm going to say this out loud. Men have been the opposite of faithful in our culture for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's time for us to change that, especially in the church.
Yep.
So men, let's step up. Let's be faithful, because one of the best men that I know, John talked about this weekend in service, Mr. J. Howard Craps. 75 years of
look
ministry.
At that. 75 years of ministry.
That's crazy.
He's 94 and still
with it.
Still not just with
Nikes
it. Still,
he's wearing? He's wearing classic Nikes.
He's still active and alive and moving and doing stuff.
It was
incredible.
It was a real good pleasure to be. John sat down with him, and it just radiated wisdom and faithfulness. And I think it was there was by no accident that he was brought in to do that.
Yeah, it's perfect.
And because a lot of people might not know who he is. Because he's been retired from Central for 24 years. Longer than some people
Jamie
have been alive.
Jamie started in 2000, but he had stepped out before that.
Oh, okay.
And there was an interim. I think Randy kind of did it in the interim. And so it's been about 25-ish, 26 years that he's been out.
Yeah. But the perfect person to talk about. And again, this is the reason, and we're going to bookend our conversation, the road to Hannah. Now, one of your favorite Pixar movies, I believe, is Cars.
Cars is all right.
I thought it was going to be your number. What's your number one?
Toy Story.
Oh, okay. But you are a Pixar guy.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite songs from any Pixar movie is "Life is a Highway."
The Rascal Flatts remake.
Life is a Yeah, that was a good one. And I think that's the perfect bookend to our conversation.
Yeah, we should have played that.
We really should. While they go out, you're doing the closing. We could still do that. It's Friday.
I'm only doing the closing on traditional.
Oh, see, then we're not going to do that.
Because we're going to go into Goodness of God and Firm Foundation.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. But Trevor, thanks for sitting in.
Yep.
I'm glad that you did finish this up. I didn't realize that John's almost a tradition with him that he takes off Labor Day. I didn't know that. Did you do Labor Day last year?
I did.
Oh, see? Oh,
I did.
And
which
maybe
is
Thanksgiving.
I did. I got that one again this year. Which more fantasy football. I got a lot of drafts this weekend. So it's always a busy stretch here, but it's good.
But it's good. So make sure check out all of those events for men and women with Central in the month of September. CentralNow.com/events is all that. Sign up for groups at CentralNow.com/groups. Now, before we go, I want to tell you before we get into our interview, the next series that we're looking at is The Body of Believers, and this is our Fall Churchwide series. We're looking at how we all are many parts, but we're made to be one, and just really go all. And it's a good coming out of the Book of Acts. So the thing that we're going to do, trying to do this, and we're going to see how this works. You'll see more information on this on our social media page, and I'll have more information on the episode description of this episode, but we want to hear from you. So part of the Body of Believers is we're going to have this big, have you heard about this? This thing out in the center where people can write what Central has meant to them.
I've not heard this.
Yeah, so there's going to be almost like this display, and then on one side is that where you can write what Central has been to you, and on the back is almost like an archive of things that have been special over the last 170 years, kind of like we did last year for Memorial Day. So you're going to see that. So we thought, what's it like of a way that we can do something online? So we're going to ask the same question to you in the online world. How has Central made a difference in your life? And that might change a little bit the verbiage there, but that's the general idea. But we want to hear your voice. Not only hear from you, but hear your voice. So we're going to challenge you to make a voice memo, and I'll show you how, and I'll have details again about how you can do this. But in your phone, 1 to 2 minutes, tell about what Central has done for you in your voice memo. We're going to play that on the Central Weekly. So that's right, ladies and gentlemen, you can be a guest on the Central Weekly. We will play your voice memo about how God has moved in your life with Central and stuff like that. And then John and I are going to listen to those, and we're going to comment and just kind of interact with those over the next 8 weeks. Maybe a little bit less. If we don't get a lot, we'll see. So
you hear that, Jackson Kirkpatrick? One of the most dedicated Central Weekly listeners.
Yes. Put in your voice memo how has Central made a difference in your life. And again, that question might look a little different. We haven't figured that out, but I'll let you know in the description of this episode. Trevor Ile, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for your faithfulness, my friend. How many years at Central now?
11?
Yeah.
No, is that right? Yeah, 11 formally on staff.
Yeah.
And a lot in life.
A lot in life. Well, Trevor, thanks so much. Now we're going to throw it over to our conversation with Mr. Joe Fatheree. And this is going to be a good one, ladies and gentlemen. So after this little break, here comes Joe. Thanks, guys. Bye. And we're back with our special guest, Mr. Joe Fatheree. Joe, say hi.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Jared.
I'm glad you're here. I'm gonna struggle a little bit with this podcast interview because you noticed I said Mr. Joe Fatheree. To call you Joe is really weird for me, and now I'm gonna tell our people why. Mr. Fatheree, you were my history teacher at Effingham High School.
That's right.
So this is the really cool thing to have you on the podcast. And as a special guest, we're going to get into all things Joe Fatheree, all things family, how faith has played a role. And I also want to talk in our conversation, talking about the study that you're doing for the fall group term, something that's new that you've developed with James. We're calling it Make Relationships Matter.
Yes.
But it's from a book by Kyle Idleman. I'm just excited for you to talk about it because I think it's something that's going to kind of change a little bit of the DNA of our people here at Central. So, Joe, you are very familiar with being behind a microphone in the fact that you again, I'm excited for people to know a lot about you as a teacher and then kind of different segments in your life of how you brought in a lot of videography and all that kind of stuff. So, Joe, are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go, Jared.
All right. Mr. Joe Fatheree, Effingham County. Tell us a little bit about how you grew up and how maybe church and family and faith played a role in that.
You know, I was really fortunate. I grew up in a small town, Southern Illinois, and my family didn't have a lot at the time. A lot of people in the community didn't. But it didn't mean you didn't have a good quality of life. And I was very fortunate that we had an elderly couple, Berlin Nola Lee, that lived down the road from my parents' house. And what the greatest gift that was ever given to me was given by them. They walked down the road and asked my parents if I could come to church with them on Sundays.
Really?
So at age 4, I started going to church, and I just saw life through a different lens at that time. And my family at the time, there really weren't any Christians in the family, but it led to my mom, my younger brother, and I all getting baptized when I was in junior high. My dad at the time was, I think, estranged would be the word to say, from Christ. And at age 70, though, he walked down the aisle, gave his life over to Christ, and was baptized. And that was just a miracle that you can see that, you know, we're not in charge. We get asked to plant seeds. We don't necessarily get asked to harvest them. But I got to see both ends of that with my dad. And so I met my wife when I was in college. She's a strong Christian believer. And Darlene and I got married in college. We were married 35 years this past week.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And Christ has always been the centerpiece of our marriage, and is, thank goodness that he was, because he's also the centerpiece of both of our kids' marriages. And it's just something I love about him. We've been able to watch Christ work in and through us for the past 35 years.
Yeah. You're Mr. Fatheree. I'm gonna
You can call me Joe or Mr. Father, either one that makes you feel, because I know how it was for me when I was talking to my teachers. So
you've just got, to me, it's amazing to watch you now as kind of an adult. As on this side, me as an adult, seeing you as an adult, and as now as a grandfather, and it's just been neat to see your faith has just been a rock that's just steady, and it's right there. And it's crazy to think that Haley, your daughter, you're probably the first father-daughter combo on the Central Weekly. So
wow.
Congratulations!
Well, thank you.
I have a plaque. I'll give it to you later. It's an honor, I know. But hey, and I want to talk a little bit about Haley and your son and just what they're doing now. But back to Darlene, she is awesome. And she is just one of the most generous, spirited persons that I know. And I didn't really know Darlene when I was in Effingham. So let's cross our lines just a little bit first before we go back to you. So I grew up in Effingham. You grew up in Effingham County, right?
I grew up in Clay County. Moved to Effingham, yeah.
Right next to each other.
Yes.
If you know Effingham County, you know Clay County.
Yes,
that's
very
for sure.
much.
They're a 1-2 punch right
That's
there.
right.
But that's the thing. I grew up in Effingham all life. You started teaching at Effingham High School in what year?
My first year at Effingham High School would have been 1989.
Okay. And so I graduated in 04.
Yes.
And I think I had you my junior year. Again,
Yes.
I was talking to somebody about this, but I couldn't remember.
Yeah, it would have been American history.
Yeah. And I had, who was the other teacher that probably had freshmen?
So we had Mr. Donaldson there, who was
Yep.
a Christian, and Mr. Watkins, who was a Christian,
Yep.
and Mr. Seiler, who was a Christian.
Yep. Keep going. You had a Catholic. He was his wife was the coroner. I'm going blank on his name.
Oh, Mr. Hammer.
Yes, Mr. Hammer.
Yeah.
And I think my love of history it was there, but it really was just ignited with both of you guys. Mr. Hammer was a great teacher.
Yeah, he is.
Great personality. And we always joke that we were opposites in every way. I was a diehard Cubs fan. He was a diehard Cardinals fan. We had more, but I knew I was, Protestant. He was Catholic. So we just had a lot of fun in the classroom. But here's a cool thing too of how some roads stretched. Our very own Lamar Choate was Mr. Donaldson's student teacher.
Student teacher, yeah. And we were actually just talking about that a few minutes ago, about how that really shaped his career and stuff. And it's kind of interesting now because he's getting closer to the end of his career. Mr. Hammer's getting close to that. I will give Jim one shout out. He's also a Red Sox fan, and I'm a Yankees fan, and so we have this great love and respect for one another, but not on the baseball field.
Yep. So speak on that, because I know Mr. Donaldson played a big role as a leader for you, but also as a Christian man. So speak into the importance, and this will kind of go back into our conversation here in a little bit when we get into the book, into the study, mentorship. What's been the value of having a Christian mentor in your life?
Well, that was something I didn't understand growing up. And so I saw people that I really respected, and a lot of those were in the school system that I taught at. So I had Delane Donaldson, who, he would teach all day long. Then he would go and he'd work as an adjunct professor at Lakeland College, but he also was an itinerant minister. And I really respected that out of him. Tom Fish, who was the dean of students probably when you were there, also a tremendous Christian leader, but he would go out and preach. He would do prison ministry. And I just saw a lot of the things in those men that I wanted in my life. I liked how they led their families. I liked how they listened and how their faith was not something they did on Sundays. It was a deeply embedded into their lives. It was a part of who they were. And I loved how their children and their families responded to things. And so those are things I wanted. And I know, especially in Tom's case, I went to him one time and I asked him, I said, I really respect how you live your life and how your faith is deeper than just going to church on Sundays. And I said, I'd really like for you to mentor me. And he was like, well, what is a mentor? Tell me what this is. And I said, well, it's somebody, that you come to and you respect and you ask questions. He goes, well, I can do that. And I really found out, I think one of the biggest periods of growth in my life was when I figured out I wasn't the smartest person in the room. And if I wanted things, I needed to go talk to people who had life experiences. And so God sent me on this quest to go do that and to talk to people, and boy, did he bring them. And that's one of the things, if you want to be challenged and you ask God for those things, he will put them in front of you. And I really learned a lot about how to be a better man, how to be a better husband, how to be a better father, how to be a better community member, and how to be a better servant for him. And it takes the me out of it, and it puts the we in it, and it puts the he in it. And I think that's where probably one of the biggest periods of growth in my life.
I think it's just crazy because we knew each other when I was a teenager, but there was a big gap of 15 years that we really didn't, So it's neat to see what you've been doing in those 15 years. And
well, likewise, I tell you, my teacher heart is really proud, Jared, because when I first started coming down here, I'm like, wow, it's Jared, and I saw the talent you had from singing and music to the conversations we had in the classroom. But I think it's one of the biggest gifts God gives us as a teacher is you get a chance to pour energy into people who are going to be the next leaders of the world. And for me to be here last week and to see you and your wife step forward as going to be the new campus pastors down in Carbondale, I am just so beyond proud of how God has worked in your life, and that I actually had a small part of that.
Yeah, it's neat to know. I mean, you were definitely one of those guys that I could look to and say, hey, that was a Christian man that I had in my life. Because I mean, that was the thing growing up. It was always weird. In my youth group at Christ Church, I had never had anybody exactly my age. I always had people older than me, and I always had people younger than me. And I think that was actually to my benefit. I think I was able to mentor a little bit of those kids, have those friendships, but also learn a lot from those lessons of those people growing up. And just to go back, I did not know that you and Tom were that close. Mr. Fish, for me, my best friend was Zach. And Zach, he lost his life.
Yes, he did,
probably
unfortunately.
15 years ago in an accident. But that is one of the most powerful moments of my life was at Zach's funeral. I don't know if you were there or not. But the way Tom talked about his faith and he basically preached that at his son's funeral. And I can't imagine how he did that. That was only through the Holy Spirit. But just to see how he shaped, and I didn't even know that, shaped your own life. And that's just really cool because Tom that's a good family right there.
Very good family, yes.
So let's go back to our shared churches, shall we? So you, I believe, went to Willow Street.
Yes.
Growing up, and that's the cool story too. Back when I was in high school, our youth groups the churches almost merged back together because Christ Church was a split from Willow Street. We won't get into the splits. We'll talk about the goodness. But back in 04, 05, I think probably 03, 04, they almost merged back together, which would have been an amazing reconciliation story. And again, I just kind of want to focus on that part of it. But leadership in the church, how has that played a role in your life?
Oh boy. Do you mean being a leader? Okay. One of the things I've learned is that the people who take on those positions, they have a lot of weight on their shoulders, and it is not about you. It is about God's word, and is about carrying his message forward. It's about leading with a humble heart. And, I've seen a lot of different things over the course. I've preached for many years. I used to serve as an itinerant minister, and sometimes you got into situations where minister left at noon. They wanted you there at 5:00, and so you walked into church that night, and half the church is excited you're there, and half of them is, boy, like, what are you doing here? And in those cases, it's all about healing and about getting the people together on the same page about going out and preaching, teaching the gospel. And so I've had the privilege of working in a lot of different churches, working with a lot of different leaders and a lot of different personalities. And what I love is when people leave their titles and their prestige and their jobs outside the doorstep, and we're there for one sole reason, and that's for serving God and sharing the message around the world. And so that's been a really powerful part of shaping who I am, and I'm very thankful that my wife and kids were a part of it. And so, and Taylor and Hannah and Whitley, they live in Knoxville area, and Haley and Hayden, and Beckham and Amelia, they live, of course, in this area here, in 10 Church here, watching Christ become the centerpiece of their marriage and their lives, and knowing that Darlene and I were a part of that, but it's also been part of the people in the Effingham community or in the Xenia community or in the other communities that we've served in. All of those people have had a part of our lives and our ministry. And, there's a great section at the end of this book we're going to talk about in a little bit, One at a Time by Kyle Idleman. I always have people cheat, Jared, and I have them go to the last chapter first. And in the end, it starts with a story about you've been taken home, and an angel of God is standing there talking to you, and you see people walking in the distance, and it's people that you've had a small part of ushering them in to the gates of heaven. And that's where I look at it's very much a we ministry. It's never a me ministry. But I think for me, it's just all those people that have impacted me, from people like Tom and Jody Fish, to Delane and Sandy, to Kevin Kalklaser, who's a minister in Newton's and one of my best friends in life, to the work I see here at Central. I love the passion and leadership in this church, and that it's very forward thinking, and that this church is out doing a lot in the community, and we're not tucked behind the walls of Central, but Central is really out in the community teaching and doing things.
Yeah. I think you made a really good point. I just want to briefly talk about that too, how you said that so many times when you come in, especially a new environment, as a leader in a church, there's got to be a lot of healing that happens first. And I think John has experienced that as he's transitioned into his lead role in his course of preaching. There's a lot of healing that needs to happen. We aren't going to reach our full potential unless we let the Holy Spirit do a lot of stuff and healing in our lives. And I think that's just a good point. And I think it is there's no accident that we're talking about this in the month of August, because you as a teacher, and that career, but also just the kingdom impact that's had. We talked about it with our conversation with Mrs. Green, Kelsey, and just about how she's been able just to impact. And you have such a specific, I'm not going to say that right. You weren't my English teacher, so, but just a very specific place that you can pour into these students, and you could do that with a loving spirit, and you could do that and encourage those relationships. And there's a lack of the fruits of the Holy Spirit, but yet those are the things alongside teaching about English, teaching about history, that you can bring into your classroom. Well,
the whole series we're getting ready to start is called Relationships Matter, and education is a missions field, and you have kids that are coming from strong Christian families. You have kids that come from families that don't know anything about Christ. You have
no families at all.
And that doesn't mean that they're struggling with all kinds of life. Some of those have life going on very well for them, but it's a missions field in the terms that they need somebody that can just sit down and talk and listen to them. And that was, I taught history for years. I taught English. I taught a pre-engineering class that just kind of blew up, and just all of a sudden it got media attention all over the world for it. But the best thing in my 34 years of teaching was being able to sit down and talk with kids every day and listen where they're coming from, and give them a platform where they could kind of just let you know what was happening in life and what they needed and how we could guide them and how we could help families and who we could connect them with. And people ask me, why did you stay in public education? And I said, it was the kids. I mean, I said, they came in and challenged me every day to think differently about things. And they kept me abreast of the new trends and the challenges and the benefits of life and stuff going on. And I loved, the hard and the good times both. I loved them all because it stretched me, it made me grow, and it made me a better human.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go off on a tangent real quick. Are you ready for this tangent?
Oh, go for it.
One of the things that you were known for when I was a teenager was your, now you'll help me out with the name of it. You had to go against the castle. What did you call it? Because I was telling Eric about this earlier. Basically, you'd have a group, and you were supposed to submit your plan to conquer the castle.
Yeah.
What was the name of that, and how successful? Tell us a
So
little bit
we
about
had
it.
this was pre-internet, and so
You had to be more creative.
you had to be more creative. And I taught ancient history, and we didn't have all the multimedia infrastructure like we got today. So I don't know. God brought me one day. He said, create this castle project. We go to the Middle Ages, and every semester I design a new one from somewhere in the different parts of the world. Yeah. And I'd tell the kids, I said, hey, they'd have to write a research paper. Yeah. They'd have to debate. And I said, but you know what? You write your research paper on life in the Middle Ages. And I gave them, a series of prompts they had to write on. But I said, you're also going to write your debate notes. And so the kids, we'd put a chair in the middle of the room for me, and we'd put their teams out there, and they would debate me about how to strategically break into a castle. And I'd draw it up on the board. Little did I know at the time the epic battles that would take place, because they're in their because if they could get in, I would give them a free 100-point test grade.
Oh wow!
Because if they did the research and they could debate me on that level of knowledge, then there was no free to it. They'd earned it.
Yeah.
My goodness, Jared, did that turn into epic battles? And little did I know, moms and dads and aunts and uncles, and they would sit around the tables, which I loved, figuring out how to strategically break in. I had probably 9 students in the 10 or 15 years I taught that project get in, or 9 teams. A lot of them earned extra credit, but where it got rough at was whenever the internet came to life, because then they started emailing professors around the world. They emailed castle curators, and now I'm debating people in Eastern Europe, and I'm like, where did this come from? So it put me on my toes. I'm digging, and it was so much fun. And I still had some students years later, when they see me, it was either the highlight of their career or they're still semi-frustrated because they didn't get in. So
I had a feeling that our group tried to get in through the latrine and go up that way, which is the most
famous
disgusting.
Entry point. Yes, very disgusting. But, famous entry point. And I give them credit because I don't think I could do that.
No, I don't think. It reminds me of Shawshank Redemption every time. But
exactly.
The opposite. So before we get off of your teaching career, I want to talk a little bit about, because you were honored, you won't do this, but I will. You were honored with Teacher of the Year. But also talk a little bit about that, how that maybe put you in some different ways to share your faith that probably weren't able to before that, and kind of the career shift maybe that you made when you got into films.
Well, God really, He has blessed my family in so many ways. And I will tell you that, yes, I've been recognized in a variety of different ways, but it's only because I had great kids in the classroom, and they poured their hearts out on the work. When I was at F&M, especially the last few years, I taught a 2-hour class. The kids wouldn't stop to go to the restroom. They wouldn't stop to go out in the hallway because they found their passion and they got so deep into their work. But because of that, I was the Illinois Teacher of the Year in 2007. I was the NEA's top national one, recognized in 2009. And then in 2016, I was named one of the top 10 teachers in the world by the Varkey Foundation. And really, it just did open up a myriad of different missions from all parts of the world. And I remember finding out that we were going to go to the Middle East and be able to work there. And so the big thing for me was praying about how God would open doors of ministry for me there. Yeah. And, and then also in the early 2000s, I started with Craig Linval, who's unfortunately no longer with us, started doing documentary films, and we did 3 together. They all showed in 100 million homes nationwide on either PBS, MLB, documentary channel. We were highly recognized for those. And it was awesome because we would fly out on a Friday night and go to all different parts of the planet, and then to meet like former Secretary of Defense or Major League Baseball players, or, we'd be out west shooting a documentary film on a disabled mountain climber crawled up Everest on his knees. And Monday morning we were back and we were teaching. But the thing that I loved about all those things was whenever I was out on the weekends or in the summers or in the evenings, I was always trying to find a way to bring stuff back to my students.
Yeah.
And my kids then got access to all kinds of people around the planet. And it's led to, opportunities that, my wife and I both retired in May, and I don't know, I was retired for about a day. And then we've had some stuff call where we're able to do stuff, but I'm a little bit more selective now and really trying to find a way that I can really deeply embed the kingdom's work in everything that I do.
Yeah. So I think that's a good transition.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to ask you the question, and it's kind of a loaded question because I know we want to talk about the book, but also I think how God has played a role in forming your story into this book and vice versa. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to ask Mr. Fatheree the question that we ask all of our guests: how has God been working in your life lately? We'll be right back. And we're back to wrap up our conversation with Joe Fatheree, like that. See,
there you go. That's even better. We've really progressed.
So, Joe, how has God been working in your life lately?
Wow. COVID, of course, happened in 2020. And when it hit, I remember we went in on a Friday, and I saw all this happening through my Global Teacher Prize stuff because it was already in different parts of the world and it was shutting down. And I'm just like, I'm seeing what's happening to my friends all over the planet. And I'm watching people in northern Italy that we knew that one guy lost like 4 or 5 aunts and uncles in a week. And I'm just watching the devastation take place. And then I see it hit in Seattle area, and they're kind of trying to figure out how to close that off. And I figured, the writing was on the wall that some stuff was we were going to be with this for a while. And so we came in on Friday. They told us, they said, hey, Monday, we're going to have kids, and that's probably going to be the last day of school. And then over the weekend hit, and they're like, we're just bringing you guys in for the day. And we got there on Monday morning, and the superintendent came in. He said, you're here for however long it takes you to get your stuff, you're going home, and then we're going to figure out how do we flip 150 years of education in a week to make sure our kids have access to this stuff. And so there are a lot of emotions running through. And I know my mom and dad, I was one of 6 kids, and my parents grew up in the Great Depression, and I just remember all those stories all the time. That was a very deep part of our DNA and our family, is like hard times. And so Darlene and I are home. I'm like, I don't know, Jared, is this going to be 2 weeks or is it going to be 10 years?
Yeah.
And what's it going to look like? And so one of the opportunities that came out of Illinois Teacher of the Year was being able to go back and get my degrees. And so I told Darlene, I said, I've been toying around with the idea of getting my doctorate for quite a while. And so the opportunity presented itself to go back to University of Illinois to do that remotely. And so I started back. And my degree is in educational policy and organizational leadership, but the focus of my studies is artificial intelligence and human cognition. And I'm really interested about some of these new technologies and the impact they're having on our kids, both good and bad. And we've seen that happen with cell phones and social media. We kind of gave it out like candy back in early 2000, and now we're seeing, incredibly high rates of teen suicide. The CDC came out a couple of years ago and said teen suicides have increased 70% over the last 10 years. Children of color and girls are 3 times more likely to commit suicide than young white men. And so I really wanted to find and that technology is unidirectional. It doesn't really go out and actively seek to make relationships with you. And without getting too deep into it, some of this new technology is going to. And so while I see a lot of good things, like, women, they're discovering breast cancer 5 years earlier than they could before. I mean, who could argue that that's a bad thing? Or medicines that are being created at an incredibly fast rate that are healthy. But I worry about our kids. And so God's put me in a position where I'm actually involved in very high level conversations all around the world. I lead a commission in London right now. I'm involved in a lot of policy conversations around the United States right now, working with a lot of districts on this. So I'm just in my final stages of finishing my doctoral degree up. And the thing that leads me to where we're going to go next is none of that really matters unless I have relationships, people to talk to them. And, how do you sit down with people from totally different walks of life, totally different beliefs, find value in one another, find a common place where we can come together and have conversations. So also during COVID, my wife and I were going to a church in Clay County, Red Brush Christian Church. It's a great church. And like everybody else, we had to go remote. And so we were leading Bible studies online. Darlene and I were, our son and his wife went to Southeast Christian Church in Louisville, well-renowned church in the U.S., and we started attending virtual Bible studies down there, and we found one that was a 3/3 group, and they did 90 minutes, kind of like we do here. And boy, I tell you, we got pushed hard through that Bible study. I'm thankful God put us in that place. And whenever COVID, I guess, broke a little bit, our daughter and son-in-law were here, and we started coming to Central because you guys had Friday night services, and there's room for us to move around and do stuff. And we just fell in love with the church. We loved, Jamie was the minister at the time. You were doing stuff. John and the team were doing incredible stuff, with the worship team. And one of the things we really appreciated was the effort that Central made to keep this church family together, and the effort they made to take care of the needs of the people who are really, really hurting. And it wasn't Red Brush wasn't doing that, but but when we came back, there was just more room for us to come down and spread out. And we got to come down and see our daughter and our son-in-law and our new baby grandboy at the time. And now we got 2 additional granddaughters. But Darlene and I knew we were going to be retiring sometime soon. And so we decided that this was a natural fit for us. The church was incredibly welcoming. We've never felt anything but here. Like I said, we love that the missions are very forward-facing here. And one of the things that we've known in our ministry for a long time, God doesn't call us just to come and to partake of the meal. He calls for us to come and to help cook the meal and deliver the meal and to feed others and do things. And so we tried to find our place as to what our place was here. And so Darlene got pretty involved in the children's ministry, and she's still doing stuff here, and she loves that. And so James and I really connected and I approached them about doing a small group. And the piece about relationships matter really resonated with me because
that was something you were always like, this is it.
It is. And because I go back to the gift that was given to me at age 4, and those relationships matter. And I go back, and I don't tell this story a lot. I have a little bit more as of lately, but when I was in kindergarten, I had this incredible kindergarten teacher who just... She knew I came from a home that wasn't a Christian home, and yet, boy, she poured her love into me. And, I was probably a rough around the edges kid at the time, and, well, not probably, I was. And then I thought I got away from her, and I came down that junior high hallway in 6th and 7th and 8th grade and she was my new language arts teacher. And then I was rough around the edges, but I was also a teenager. So that was the worst combination of all. And you know what? She just loved me all the more and took care of me. And I didn't get it at the time, but as I got older, I understood. But I remember getting baptized, and I remember Mrs. Stanley telling me, I came in, I'd forgotten something in class, and she had her prep period that hour, and she just stopped me and she goes, "I'm so proud of you for giving your life over to Christ." And she goes, "You don't know now what you've done, but you will know later the gift that you've been given." And that's all she said. But boy, it stuck with me the rest of my life. But I come back to this because as I got older, I realized the life lessons this woman had given me. Yeah. And she was one of the first people that we invited to our wedding, and it was just more and more things. And so she passed away right before COVID. And where I grew up in Xenia, when the NEA, I got it. I was recipient of their national award. The community was very nice, and it's, as you mentioned, kind of off the air. It's kind of hard to talk about this stuff for me, but they put up a sign in recognition of it. And I only say that for two reasons. One, my parents were old, were elderly, and they were sick, and they didn't get to go see any of this stuff. So for my mom and dad, it was a real point of pride for them to know that their son was able to go out and be able to do some things. But more importantly, when Mrs. Stanley passed away, I got a text from one of her sons, and it was his son standing in front of my sign. He said, Mom never left you in your life, and we know how she was with you, and so she's never going to leave you in her death because we're spreading her ashes under your sign. Oh. And that, to me, it just... when I met her, Jared, I was 5. Mm-hmm. I'm 58 now. That's 54 years later. That's why I taught for 34 years was to repay a debt to that woman, because I do realize relationships matter. And sometimes when you pour into people, you don't see the impact, maybe never in your lifetime. And so that's why I'm still working today in schools. I'm still consulting and doing things, but I'm really most excited about the work that's taking place here at Central. So last year, James had come to me and said, I'd like you to teach something to do with relationships matter. And so I was looking. And we went to Asheville, North Carolina for Easter that year. And Darlene and I are driving back, and we love to listen to Kyle Idleman preach from Southeast Christian. And so put him on, from the 10-hour trip back.
Get a couple sermons in.
That's right. Got a couple sermons in, and boom, one at a time. Very first one came up, and I thought, wow, God, I prayed and asked you on the way down to find something, and sure enough. Yeah. So we listened to all of them all the way back. Yeah. And I got home, bought the book, and called James, and I said, well, he goes, I just picked this up too. Mm-hmm. And so what we've done is we've taken some work that James and I think some of the staff did here. We're using the Holy Bible, which is the best text of all. I mean, I can give everybody else their credit, but being God authored is the one. But this piece that Kyle writes is great because it's organic, it's easily digestible. We encourage people not only we go through a chapter a week. We do the first half of the book in the fall. We'll do the second half in the spring. And he really paints a really great picture about why relationships matter. And his prayer in here is very much this: God, help me to see the people that you set in front of me every day. And I think the kicker of it is, help me see them as you do. Yeah. Yeah. And so that's what we're going to do is we're going to go through this. We're going to start here in a couple of weeks. I hope people that are listening to this sign up. If anybody got to see the movie Jesus Revolution that came out back in the spring, there were a couple of telling quotes in there that was brought up, and one of them was that this movie was made from back in the 1960s, early 70s, and what is a real rough time period in U.S. history. And one of the lead characters goes, "This generation is searching for something, but they're searching in all the wrong places." Yep. And we've got so many more things that are hitting people today, which I don't think people in the 60s could have ever thought was possible, but boy, we're getting hit left and right. Yeah. And the other one that hit me really, really hard was whenever one of the lead characters said that we can only walk through doors that are open to us, but the doors to your church are closed. Yeah. Yeah. And I thought of that because the church, we can look at that and say, well, hey, our doors are locked because of school, because of safety stuff. Mm-hmm. You're not talking about the physical structure. Yeah. He's talking about the doors of our heart, which is where God lives at. And so what I found out is, I think a lot of times we think, well, the people God puts in front of us, well, it's not only our clique or our social groups or, the people we go bowling or watching football games with. God puts a lot of people in front of us that don't look like us and think like us and talk like us. And so he's telling us to love them like he loves them. And that's the challenge that this study brings is how do we get the tools to do those things? How do we not stay like the prophet Obadiah where we're trying to hide all the prophets of God in the cave, but we're actually being Elijah and we're going out to Mount Carmel to preach that day? Yeah. It's not necessarily easy, but I will say the people that went through the class last year said it was life-changing. Yeah. And it was life-changing for me as well, not just them. And I am so excited. I think we've got like 100 spots that we're going to take people through. And I really hope that we're way beyond full.
Yep.
And we've got to find a way to get more people in there.
Yeah, centralnow.com/groups. You'll learn a little bit more about this study. We give a little description on there, but you've got to do that now. We're going to shoot this episode's probably going to come out September 3rd. And I would not be, and this is sad, but I would not be surprised if those groups are full by the time this episode hits.
I heard a lot of people are really in it because people, if you've noticed since COVID, people want to be here.
Yep.
They are vulnerable and they want help. And now, and I think people in the church want to help.
Yep.
And they want to serve. Sometimes we just don't always know the way to do that.
We were
so
blessed.
This takes a little bit of the fear off of that.
Yeah, we were really blessed that Central, it's almost like the baton, we really, when you're a successful baton transfer, you pick up a step. And I feel like where maybe the world lost a couple steps with COVID, Central was blessed, and the church in some aspects as well was blessed to kind of pick up a step. And I think he
as a former
us,
track coach, I'm liking you're talking my language.
But I really like, and I think it's by no accident that this is starting now with this study while we're going into multi-site, because we're going to be putting ourselves in new places with new people, and we've got to have the tools to, hey, how do we make this relationship work? Because it matters so much. But how do we replicate disciples? And
well,
I think
it
that's a big
does,
thing
and
that
I don't
James
think we
wants.
could hit it any better time. And for all those that are just seeing positive change take place, and we want you to be a part of it. Yep. This could be for somebody that's relatively new, but this could be somebody that's been here for a long time, and it's just the Holy Spirit's just really trying to activate you. And the last piece I'd say on this too is, and while the elders and the staff has a role in this. Mm-hmm. We all do. Yeah. I mean, when you read Matthew 28 and the Great Commission, it doesn't say John and Jared and James. It says, all of us. And it wasn't our minister at our local church that came calling in my house. Yeah. It was a neighbor who had been equipped.
Yep.
And that's why I'm here.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think that's a good where we're going to end it. But gosh, we could continue on for a little.
It's
for a
all
couple
good
more
stuff,
hours.
man.
I say this all the time, and people are going to be laughing when they hear it. I want you back on the podcast because there's a couple things I want to just nail down, and maybe we start at those. But I'm grateful that you took the time to join us on the podcast. I was a little intimidated bringing a teacher in with the expertise that you do. I said the same thing to Haley, your daughter, because she is rocking it with her podcast.
God's really working through them right now.
So it's really neat to see what you started in your years of teaching and all that stuff, and then now seeing her get into media and using it to be a tool to spread the gospel. It's just so cool to witness. So thank you.
Thank you, Jared,
for being with us, and thank you for just really being intentional in your relationships. I think that's the period right there. So, Mr. Joe Fatheree, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And that's a wrap for episode number 79 of the Central Weekly. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, be on the lookout for the ways that you can be on the Central Weekly in the next couple of weeks. We're excited about the body of believers and how you can play a part of it for our Fall Churchwide series. That's it for the weekly. We'll see you next week for episode 80. We're going to be celebrating a milestone. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.